The Hidden Room, Discovering the Legacy Behind a Forgotten Key. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon when I received the call. The kind of day where the sun shines too brightly, and the world feels deceptively calm. My name is Sarah, and I'm a real estate agent specializing in historical properties. I was at my desk, buried under a stack of paperwork, when my phone rang, jolting me from my monotony. "Hi, Sarah. It's Lisa from the estate sale company. We've got a bit of a situation with one of the properties. I thought you might be able to help." Lisa's voice was laced with urgency, immediately piquing my interest. "What's going on?" "It's the old Miller place on Oak Street. We're supposed to be clearing it out, but we've hit a snag. There's a locked room we can't get into, and the key is nowhere to be found. We've checked everywhere." I was familiar with the Miller house. It had been a fixture of the neighborhood for as long as I could remember, a grand Victorian with an air of faded elegance. Mrs. Miller, the elderly owner, had been a local fixture as well, known for her quiet demeanor and the sprawling estate she maintained. After she passed away, the property had been left to her distant relatives, who were eager to sell it. "Can you come over and take a look?" Lisa's voice was tinged with frustration. "Maybe you'll have better luck finding the key. The new owners are getting anxious." I agreed to help, thinking it would be a straightforward task. I needed a break from my endless paperwork anyway. I headed over to the Miller house, which was located on a quiet, tree-lined street. The house itself was an old Victorian, with creaky floorboards and dusty furniture that hadn't been touched in years. The garden was overgrown, with ivy climbing up the brick walls and wildflowers overtaking the lawn. When I arrived, Lisa was waiting for me at the front door. She looked relieved but frazzled, her eyes betraying a sleepless night. "Thanks for coming," she said, giving me a quick hug. "The room in question is upstairs, at the end of the hallway. It's been locked for as long as I can remember. We've tried everything to get it open, but no luck." The hallway was dimly lit, the light filtering through dusty, cobweb-covered windows. At the end of the hall was a door with an old-fashioned keyhole, the kind you rarely see anymore. The door was solid, made of oak with intricate carvings, but there was no sign of a key hanging around. I could see why they had trouble. "Have you searched the entire house?" I asked, eyeing the door. Lisa nodded, her face tense. "Yes, and the previous owners had no idea about the key's whereabouts. We've checked every drawer, every cupboard. It's like the key vanished into thin air." I began searching the room adjacent to the locked one. It was filled with old furniture draped in white sheets, like ghosts of the past. I started with the built-in closet, pulling out dusty boxes and ancient clothes. Lisa joined me, flipping through drawers and old photo albums. "This place is a mess," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the dusty room. "I'm starting to think the key might have been lost a long time ago." I nodded, carefully inspecting every nook and cranny. As I sifted through a stack of old books on a high shelf, something unusual caught my eye, a small, ornate box hidden behind some old magazines. It was an old wooden box with intricate carvings, and it had a small lock on it. "Hey, Lisa, look at this," I called out, holding up the box. "Could this be what we're looking for?" Lisa came over, her curiosity piqued. She examined the box closely. "That's strange. I don't remember seeing this before. Do you think it might be related?" I wasn't sure, but the box seemed like it could be important. It felt unusually heavy for its size, and the craftsmanship was exquisite. We tried to open it, but the lock was rusted and wouldn't budge. Lisa suggested taking it to a locksmith to see if they could get it open. I agreed, and we carefully transported the box to a nearby locksmith. The locksmith, Mr. Thompson, was a gruff, middle-aged man with a penchant for detailed work. He had a small shop cluttered with locks, keys, and various tools of his trade. "This is going to take some time," Mr. Thompson said, examining the box with a magnifying glass. "The lock's pretty old, but I'll see what I can do. I've worked on similar boxes before, so let's hope it's not too much of a challenge." Lisa and I left the shop, deciding to grab a coffee at a nearby cafe. We chatted about the house and its history. Lisa mentioned that Mrs. Miller had been a well-known figure in the community, a widow who lived a quiet life after her husband's passing. The house had been a repository of her memories and belongings, and it seemed that even after her death, her past was still hiding secrets. As we sipped our coffee, I asked Lisa about the Miller family. She told me that Mrs. Miller had a son, but he had died young under mysterious circumstances. The details were vague, and there were always whispers about a family tragedy. Lisa had heard bits and pieces from locals, but no one knew the full story. The conversation was interrupted by Mr. Thompson's call. We managed to get the box open. "You should come by and take a look." When I arrived at the locksmith's shop, I found the box sitting on the counter, its contents carefully laid out. Inside were several old letters, photographs, and a small brass key. The letters were addressed to Mrs. Miller and dated from over 50 years ago. The photograph showed a young woman in various settings, always smiling but with a hint of melancholy in her eyes. I took the box back to the Miller house and showed Lisa the contents. We were both intrigued by the old letters, which described a series of personal and somewhat cryptic messages. One letter, in particular, caught my eye. It mentioned a hidden safe and described the location as being under the old oak tree. Lisa's eyes widened with excitement. "We need to check outside," she said. "Let's see if there's something buried under that tree." We went out to the large oak tree in the backyard. The tree was ancient, its gnarled branches stretching out like skeletal arms. The ground around it was uneven, with roots snaking out of the soil. We started digging, using garden tools we found in the shed. It was a hot, sweaty job, and the air was thick with the smell of earth and rotting leaves. As we dug, we talked about Mrs. Miller. Lisa shared stories she had heard from the community, how she was known for her kindness and her mysterious nature. There were rumors that she had been involved in something significant years ago, but no one knew the details. "I remember my grandmother talking about her," Lisa said. "She always said Mrs. Miller had a dark past, but she never elaborated. I thought it was just gossip, but now I'm wondering if there was some truth to it." After what felt like hours, our shovels hit something solid. We uncovered a small, rusted metal box. It was old but intact, and it had a keyhole that matched the small brass key we had found earlier. With a sense of anticipation, I inserted the key and turned it. The lock clicked open, revealing a collection of old jewelry, coins, and a few more letters. The jewelry was delicate and antique: rings, necklaces, and brooches. The coins were foreign, dated from various countries. The letters provided insights into Mrs. Miller's past, stories of her life, her family, and her experiences. One letter, in particular, was addressed to Mrs. Miller's son, who had died young. It detailed her love for him and her regrets about not being able to provide him with the life she had hoped for. It was heart-wrenching and personal, revealing a side of Mrs. Miller that few people had seen. Another letter described Mrs. Miller's involvement in a secretive charity organization during the 1950s. The organization had been dedicated to helping war orphans, and Mrs. Miller had been one of its most generous benefactors. The letters spoke of her deep commitment to the cause and the sacrifices she had made. Lisa and I carefully packed everything up and took it to the estate sale company. The heir to Mrs. Miller's estate was contacted, and they were deeply moved by the discovery. The items were valuable not just for their material worth but for the personal history they represented. The heir, a distant relative who had never known Mrs. Miller personally, was grateful for the chance to learn about her life and contributions. The estate sale went off without a hitch, and the Miller house was sold to a lovely family who promised to preserve its history. They were delighted to learn more about the house's past and to keep the legacy of Mrs. Miller alive. They planned to turn the house into a museum dedicated to Mrs. Miller's charitable work, ensuring that her story would be remembered and celebrated. As for me, I felt a sense of satisfaction in having uncovered a piece of the past and helped bring some closure to Mrs. Miller's legacy. I had always enjoyed the historical aspect of my job, but this experience had been uniquely fulfilling. It was a reminder of the hidden stories that lie within. In the weeks that followed the discovery of Mrs. Miller's hidden safe, the transformation of the old Victorian house into a museum was well underway. The new owners, the Jackson family, were deeply invested in preserving the legacy of Mrs. Miller. They meticulously restored the house to its former glory, paying careful attention to the details that had once made it a cherished home. As the house underwent renovations, I found myself visiting more frequently. I was fascinated by the progress and eager to see how the museum would showcase Mrs. Miller's story. Each time I visited, I was greeted warmly by the Jacksons, who appreciated my interest and involvement in the project. The museum's grand opening was a local event, and the community turned out in full force. It was held on a crisp autumn afternoon, the air filled with a sense of excitement and anticipation. The front lawn was adorned with colorful banners, and the old oak tree, now a centerpiece of the museum's garden, stood as a symbol of the house's storied past. Lisa and I arrived early to help with the preparations. We were greeted by the Jacksons, who had set up an array of displays showcasing Mrs. Miller's life and charitable work. The artifacts from the hidden safe were prominently featured, including the antique jewelry, foreign coins, and, of course, the heartfelt letters. As visitors began to arrive, the atmosphere was filled with chatter and curiosity. The museum had been arranged to give a glimpse into Mrs. Miller's life, with each room telling a different part of her story. The display dedicated to her charity work was particularly moving, featuring photographs of war orphans and documents detailing the contributions Mrs. Miller had made over the years. During the opening, I had the opportunity to speak with the Jacksons about their plans for the museum. They were passionate about continuing Mrs. Miller's charitable work, and they had already started organizing events to support similar causes. It was clear that they were committed to ensuring that Mrs. Miller's legacy would have a lasting impact on the community. At the end of the day, the museum was buzzing with activity. Visitors shared their impressions and stories, many of which highlighted how Mrs. Miller's contributions had touched their lives in unexpected ways. It was heartwarming to see the positive response and to know that Mrs. Miller's story was being shared with a new generation. As the museum's curator, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had led to this moment. The discovery of the Forgotten Key had been a catalyst for uncovering a rich tapestry of history that had been hidden for decades. It had also been a reminder of the importance of preserving and honoring the past. The following week saw the museum settling into a routine. School groups visited to learn about Mrs. Miller's life and the impact of her charitable work. Special events were organized, including lectures and fundraisers, all aimed at continuing Mrs. Miller's mission of helping those in need. One day, as I walked through the museum, I noticed a new addition to the displays, a small plaque dedicated to Lisa and me. It read, "In appreciation of those who helped uncover the hidden history of Mrs. Miller and preserve her legacy." It was a simple gesture, but it meant a lot. It reminded me that our efforts had made a difference and that the story we had helped to uncover was now part of something much larger. As the months passed, the museum became a cherished part of the community. People came not just to learn about Mrs. Miller but to connect with the past and reflect on the impact one person's life can have. The museum's success was a testament to the power of history and the importance of preserving it for future generations. Sometimes, when I drive by the old Victorian house, now beautifully restored and bustling with visitors, I can't help but smile. I think back to the day I found the Forgotten Key and unlocked a story that had been hidden for decades. It was a journey that had started with a simple request for help and had led to the discovery of a remarkable legacy. In the end, the Miller house had become more than just a historical site. It had become a symbol of the connections we make with the past and the ways we can honor those who came before us. The story of Mrs. Miller, once shrouded in mystery, was now an integral part of the community's history, and her legacy lived on through the museum and the lives it touched. And as I continue my work in real estate and beyond, I carry with me the lessons learned from that experience, the value of perseverance, the importance of preserving history, and the joy of uncovering hidden stories. Every old house, after all, has its secrets, and sometimes, all it takes is a little curiosity and dedication to unlock a piece of the past that enriches our present. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed these Reddit stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell so you never miss an update. See you in the next one.